The Hut Near the Bog is a subscription and advert-free podcast. Please help us keep it that way by either donating or purchasing products from our store. Or alternatively, you can give us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Just follow the link in the description below. Thank you, and we hope you enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Hut Near the Bog. As the last rows of turf are cut on the Irish Boglands and nature begins to take its steady hold, the beauty of this forgotten landscape is being reborn and flourishes for all to see. Once viewed as a wasteland, only considered useful as a supply of peat, the bog is now being reconceived as a place of stunning natural beauty and wonderment. One of the people at the forefront of this quiet but potent revolution is Tina Claffey. Having exhibited her work in New York, San Francisco, Botswana, Zambia and throughout Ireland, Tina is considered to be the preeminent photographer of the Irish Boglands. In this first of two interviews, Tina tells us how she ended up working as a nature photographer in the pristine wilderness of the African nation of Botswana.
Tina, first of all, good morning, and it's lovely to have you on the podcast. And I'm fascinated by your work, so I'd like you perhaps to tell me a little bit about your earliest memory and also growing up in Birr. What was that like?
Hi, Sheila. Yeah, delighted to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me. I'm from Birr. Grew up in Birr and grew up on a small residential street called Moore Park Street. And I suppose my earliest memory is I spent a lot of time in the garden at the back. We had a small little garden at the back, but it opened up to a kind of a massive communal kind of garden, which was almost like a big field at the back of the houses. And it was just wild, unkempt kind of an area. So I spent a lot of my time there. There was a big lilac tree there and it was hollow on the inside. So we used to play house in there, and it was just a wild area. So yeah, a lot of good memories from there with my little dog. And I suppose I was a bit of a tomboy when I was younger. I spent a lot of time outdoors. There's a river running through Birr. Did a lot of swimming, catching pinkeens, bringing them home in jars, putting them into old margarine tubs, and yeah, I suppose I loved nature really from the start, in that way. So I had a lovely carefree kind of a childhood.
Excellent. That sounds amazing. And it seems to me, listening to you, that perhaps that wilderness at the very back where that communal garden was, it influenced you in your later years.
Yeah, I suppose it did.
Would that be true to say?
I'd say so, yeah. And like my dad was a huge nature lover, and sure, we grew up watching Gerrit van Gelderen and all of those To the Waters and the Wild. Do you remember those programs that used to be on the telly? And like, of course, the David Attenborough program.
Yes.
We grew up watching those. My dad was fascinated with nature, and I mean, he used to teach us the bird songs. He was an amazing whistler, and he was able to whistle a tune of like the blackbird or the robin, and we could be like on Saturdays was our day that we'd all be working together. Like up the back of that wild field, we had a little plot where we would grow veg. So we'd spend a Saturday like picking stones, and
Excellent.
we'd be in the middle of that, and he'd stop and say, "What's that bird, Tina?" And I'd listen to it, and it was like a test, And so to this day, I know the sound, I know the tunes of the main ones, like the blackbird, the wren, the robin, the thrush. So it kind of stayed with me,
Yeah. And do you feel your dad heightened your awareness of nature?
Oh, absolutely. He's a real gentle soul. He's gone from us now, but he he very influential that way with nature with me. I remember with us I remember as a very young child, he found a hedgehog in that wild area at the back, and I remember being so fascinated. He brought me up, and we walked around it slowly, and the dog was going crazy, and we had to bring the dog away, and just to see that wild creature in our garden, it was just fantastic. Yeah, so yeah, I can definitely say he was a strong influence when it came to nature.
Yeah, and you seem to have had a beautiful childhood, and you have really good childhood memories. Is that fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Um, oh, absolutely. I mean, every Sunday we used to go somewhere. I mean, it was never extravagant or anything, but we'd go for a drive, go for a walk. We'd go to Portumna Forest Park. We'd go out to the up to the mountains, up to the Sleeve Blooms. We always went somewhere on a Sunday, for a few hours.
Excellent,
But
excellent.
otherwise, I was gone from doing morning till dusk. Really, I was out, gone. I was a real tomboy. I was out climbing trees, swimming in rivers, all of that kind of thing.
Yeah, and perhaps that's real living, and something that I think children perhaps don't get as much of now.
Yeah. Oh no, absolutely. I'm so glad we didn't have phones in those days.
Yeah,
um, yeah,
yeah,
it was a real yeah, it was a very carefree kind of a childhood, which I loved. I really really loved it.
excellent. And tell me then, Tina, when were you introduced to the bog, and what's your earliest memory of it?
My dad had a small plot in just on the border of Westmeath, and we used to go there. I think my earliest time going there, I'd say I was about 8 or 9. Um, he used to cut turf with the schlon or the schlein or whatever it's called, and you'd see, we were very. It was a full day. We'd go with the sandwiches and the tea and the whole lot. Um, but I used to look on the bog as kind of a wasteland, not a wasteland, but not something that was very much alive. But my dad used to absolutely adore going there. He loved it. I suppose it's from his own childhood. He spent a lot of time in the bog, and yeah. So my memories there were of hard work and hardship, really, of turning it and footing it and bagging it and bringing it home, and but my dad loved it. He just loved the whole essence of it. But for us, we looked on it as kind of hardship. We're like, oh no, we're going to the bog, because we knew we'd
Yeah,
be working hard for that day.
yeah,
Um, you
yeah.
know.
And it's interesting that you should say that about the hardship. And little did you know that it was almost your destiny to return to it in a different format.
Oh, unbelievable! And do you know what? I think my dad would be kind of looking over me on that. I'd say he's quite happy that I did really saw what he kind of saw. He definitely saw so much more there that I grew to see as well. You know. Um,
Excellent. And Tina, can I ask you, when did you discover that you had an eye and a flair for photography?
well, it kind of happened by chance, really. I went to college. I went to art college after school. Um, After the Leaving Cert, I went to art college in Cork, and I thought I was going to be a painter. I was convinced I was going to be a painter. But part of the module in college, in art college, you were kind of thrown into everything to do with art, sculpture, printmaking, and photography was one of them. And it was pre-digital, so we used to roll our own film and print our own images in black and white in the dark room, and we'd be sent off with our cameras into the city, and we'd come back then all excited to roll. I was hooked. I was really hooked kind of from the start. Even the smell of the chemicals, I used to get excited at the thought of printing these images. Used to come up in the dark, in the dark room, and it just blew my mind. I was really hooked from the start, and I suppose learning photography through art was a wonderful thing, because it taught me how to. We were taught really how to think and look at things from a different perspective. So that was a really great thing, I think. And yeah, and then after that, I worked as an assistant with a German photographer. Now that was a real learning curve because that was very technical. He did fashion and industrial photography. So my learning curve was very steep there. I mean, technical wise, we didn't learn huge amounts in art college, but I learned a lot. Actually, I'd say I learned more in a month with him technical wise than I ever did in college. So I'm grateful to him for that. I mean, it was amazing experience working with him.
And do you think, Tina, that actually being exposed to different aspects of photography makes you find your real niche area in the end?
Yeah, well, I mean, I obviously I love nature from the start, but I didn't really start with nature photography. It was I was in the city, so it was all cityscapes and portraits and that kind of thing. And actually for my degree show, I based my photography on my family, on the male and the female, and traditions and traditional kind of rituals that they would do. So yeah, no, the whole nature thing didn't really start until I ended up in Africa, and that was a strange kind of road that led me there as well, because I was working with the German photographer. We were doing fashion and industrial photography, and one of our jobs was to go to Kenya to photograph wedding dresses on safari. I mean, how bizarre is that? I went as an assistant to Kenya for 2 weeks with the photographer, and that opened the door for me. That experience of even that 2 weeks made me think I have to go there. I have to, when I got back to Ireland, I was like, no, I have to go back. I don't care where in Africa, because the smells, the sounds, everything about Africa just enthralled me. I was completely and utterly entranced by it. So I made my way to try and get back to Africa. And I happened to be out for lunch with Jörg, my boss, one day, and after we had come back, and he was reading the newspaper and I was having soup, and he started to laugh, and I was like, what are you laughing at? And he said, oh, I found you your perfect man. So I was like, what are you talking about? And he was looking at this article about this guy who had won the Bachelor of the Year competition in 1999, and his name is Graham McCulloch, and he had won this Bachelor of the Year competition, but he was based in Botswana in southern Africa. He had come home to enter the competition. So I read up about him anyway, and he was doing flamingo research in Botswana. So I was like, my God, sure, isn't this a great opportunity? I mean, he's Irish. He's bound to have some contacts for me, or link me, or get me there somehow. So I contacted the newspaper where the article came from, and I finally got his number through them, and I rang him. I'm sure the poor guy, he didn't know who I was. He hadn't a clue who I was, and I just explained. I said, listen, I was in Kenya for a couple of weeks, and I was just taken by the place, and I know you're in Botswana, but I said, if you have any contacts there, I'd love to spend time in Africa. So he said, sure, leave it with me, I'll get back to you. And at this point he was back in Botswana. So that was that. I didn't hear again from him for about 4 months, and then he just sent me an email. He sent me one line email saying, are you still keen? So I emailed back immediately, and I was so excited. I said, of course I'm still keen. And he said, actually, I need an assistant to photograph and document what I'm doing for my PhD. And he said, if you're willing to come out, Trinity College will pay for your flight, and I'll put you up. You'll be staying with me. So all you need is pocket money, really, for yourself. So I was like, my God, that's amazing. It would be for 3 months. So I said absolutely yes, straight away, without even consulting with anyone. I just said, yes, I'm going to come. And this was in December, and he needed me in January. So I phoned my parents and told them, and sure, they were like, what are you doing? What are you thinking of? Sure, it's like the other side of the world you're going to. And I said, well, it's only for 3 months, Anyway, they agreed. They said, okay, well, if you really want to do that, and if you really feel like that's what you want to do, go for it. So it was a big thing, because I actually had to miss my sister's wedding. My only sister was getting married, but yeah, but it was something I had to do. I just could feel it in my bones. I had to go. It was a once in a lifetime opportunity.
Yeah, it almost felt like it was your destiny.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, completely and utterly. I
Yeah.
just knew I was meant to go there. And then Kodak's sponsored me. They gave me 100 rolls of slide film, because it was still pre-digital. There was no digital film at that point. So yeah, Kodak sponsored me, and but I still had no money. I mean, I had very little money. So what I did, what I did was, I rang the Jerry Ryan show. Now the Jerry Ryan show at that time, the chat show, was had a huge listenership. It had over 1 million people listening to Jerry Ryan every morning. So I got in touch with the show. I told them I was going to meet the Bachelor of Ireland. I was an Irish girl going down to meet the Bachelor of Ireland, and I was going to be staying with him, and he's doing flamingo research. So I spoke to the researcher, and then the producer of the show rang me like later that day and asked me a bit more about it. So I explained to him, and he said, "Okay." He said, "Okay, sure. We're going to ring you on Monday morning. Are you free?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm free." So this was on a Friday. So he said, I'll ring you on Monday morning. I said, "That's great." And I said, "Looking forward to it." And then after that phone call, I went down to my camera shop in Cork, and I went into them and I said, "Listen, I'm going to be on the Jerry Ryan show on Monday morning." And I said, "If I mention your names now here for this camera shop, will you help me out with equipment?" And sure, it was like huge advertising for them. So they said, "Tina, if you can mention our names now, we will sort you out for equipment." So I was like, "That's brilliant." I went off then to the camping, the great outdoors. I went to them, and I did the same story. And they were like, "Well, if you can mention our names now, we'll sort you out with all the equipment you'll need to go there." So that was grand. Monday morning came, and the show rang me. And just before I went on, the researcher came up. I said, "Okay, Tina, now listen, before you go on, you mustn't mention any, there's no advertising, no looking for sponsorship, none of that now, because you're going live now in about 20 seconds. So just to make you aware of that." So I was like, "Yeah, no problem, that's fine." And Jerry came on anyway, and it actually was a really good laugh, the conversation with him, because he was like, how Jerry used to be. He was a real character. Like, he was like, "So you're going to meet the Bachelor of Ireland, and are you excited?" And so we kind of played on that for a while, and it was actually a really great conversation, talking about going down to Africa to meet him and everything. And then at the end of the conversation, he was like, "Okay, Tina, well, we're going to leave you there." I just said, "Just hold on 1 second, Jerry. I'd just like to thank a few people before I go." And he said, "Oh, okay." And so I said, "I just want to thank McSweeney's in Cork, and I want to thank the Great Outdoors, blah, blah, blah." And he was like, "Tina," and I was like, "Yeah." And he said, "Did you get everything for free?" And I was like, "No, no, no, no." And he was like, "You're a girl after my own heart." He said, "Good luck to you." And that was grand. So
Excellent.
yeah. So then I went back to the camera shop, and they were like, "All right, Tina," they had it all ready for me. "Tina, thanks so much. Here you are now." And they gave me it was all secondhand equipment, but really, really good old equipment of camera, the different lenses, and into the Great Outdoors. They had everything ready for me. So I was sorted that way then before I left, which was fantastic.
Excellent.
So I know I
Tina.
really tensed my arm, like, but it was kind
Oh
of,
yeah,
I
you
needed.
did, but
I needed to. I had, I just needed the equipment before I left and everything, and I just didn't have funds to do it, so I just thought I'd give it a go and
oh yeah.
hope for the best.
But I can hear a huge entrepreneurial spirit in you. Like, obviously you were so passionate about what you wanted to do and where you wanted to be, and you were going to leave no stone unturned to find your way there.
Absolutely, absolutely. And even up to that point, my parents, I think, didn't really think I was going. But then after that interview, there was a big article in the Examiner, like, photographer Queen meets Bachelor King, and there was a big articles going up nationwide, and I was like, oh my god, it kind of took off after that conversation with Jerry on Ryan. It was very funny. But
Yeah,
yeah, it got great exposure before I left. It became a big thing, you know. So
yeah.
yeah, it was great.
And you turned a lot of stone since, Tina.
Well,
You turned a lot of stone since.
I suppose I have. I suppose I have turned stone since. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
the experience in Botswana was fantastic. I mean, it really. I'm so glad
Excellent.
I took the chance to go there.
Yeah, and to be honest, we are going to talk about Botswana because it seems that it impacted hugely on your life and your life as a photographer. But I'm just hearing, in one sense, that you made your own look. That somebody who wouldn't be as audacious as yourself and knowing exactly what you wanted and where your destiny almost was, that you wouldn't have made those phone calls. You wouldn't have been so anxious to make sure you got in the names, because you knew getting in those names was vital to you getting the wherewithal to actually go and have the necessary equipment.
Well, that's it. That's it. I just felt very driven. I don't know what force is behind me, but I just knew I was going to be in Africa that following year, after being in Kenya. I just knew it. I knew it in my bones. I was going to spend time there. But I didn't know how. But anyway, I don't know.
It manifested itself.
The path kind of opened up for me to go there. You know. It did.
Well, I would actually say, I think you opened it up as opposed to it opening up for you. You had to push some doors in order to get there, and you had to be proactive in making sure you made the right moves. And I think you did superbly well. And perhaps there's a big entrepreneur in you that yet hasn't manifested itself completely, in my opinion.
Yeah, who knows?
Well,
I don't know. I suppose I never looked at it like that, but yeah, maybe.
Very good. And we'll talk about Botswana next, if that's okay with you. First of all, tell me the impact it had on you.
Well, it was massive, Sheila. I mean, I headed off on my own there. It was scary, but so exciting to get there. And I mean, I never met the guy before either, so I was hoping like that we'd get on. But I knew the minute we met that we were going to get on well. He was just a lovely, lovely guy. I flew into Gaborone, which is the capital of Botswana, and then got a bus. I had to get a bus journey, which took 6 hours up to Francistown, and that's where I met him, in Francistown. And so as soon as I got there, I knew it was going to be okay. I knew everything was going to be okay when I met him. I was like, oh no, this guy is just a really nice guy. And we stayed overnight. I stayed overnight in a hotel. He stayed with friends. And then the next day we drove to his camp, which is at the edge of the Makadikati salt pans. And that's where all the flamingos would come to breed. So he had a camp there. So I went from a 9-to-5 job in Cork City to just really and truly being immersed in nature from the get-go. It was like being in my own Attenborough movie. I was sleeping in a tree. I had a bucket shower. We cooked everything on the fire. We had hyenas coming into camp at night. It was just mind-blowing from the start. And it was just before the rains. I arrived in January, and that's the wet season. And the flamingos had already arrived, because the flamingos almost sense the rain is here. And it turned out to be the wettest year on record. The storms that rolled in were like straight out of the movies. The thunder, the lightning, the heavy, heavy rains. And that filled the Makadikati salt pans with a sheet of water. And then the flamingos were breeded in the middle of that salt pan. It's where they were at their safest, where no predator could reach them. So Graham had a microlight at camp. He had built his own little runway. So my job was to go up with him in that microlight and photograph the birds from the air. I felt like I was out of Africa. It was just insane. So photographing the birds from the air. And it was on slide film. So I was taking series of photographs, and then we'd send off the film to London, and then we get them back, and then we'd project these slides on the wall and put them together almost like a jigsaw. And I would have to quantify the birds. Then I'd have to count each and every bird. That was part of the research. And I also did field research with him, where he was taking water samples out in the pans. So I was really, really immersed in it, and it was just fantastic, just fantastic. It was supposed to be for 3 months, and that turned into a year. And in that time, I made a lot of contacts with his friends, all involved in the safari industry. So I came home to Ireland after 1 year, but only for a few months. I came home to have an exhibition of what I'd photographed for that first year, and then with the earnings on that sales of that exhibition, I flew back on a one-way ticket back to Botswana. Now, not to work with Graham. He was on to other things at that point. I worked with the contacts I had made there. I was kind of thrown into the safari industry, and that was fantastic as well. I ended up staying in Botswana for almost 9 years. And in that time, I was working with some of the best safari guides in the country. I was in pristine wilderness areas all over Botswana, from one camp to another camp, managing different camps, and it was just incredible. The guides taught me how to, and this was very, for the work I'm doing now, very, very influential. I was taught how to observe, because you really had to be careful out on the bush. Obviously, if you're in a car, you were quite safe, but once you were on foot, you're part of the food chain. So you had to learn to observe. Now, not just with your eyes. Obviously, with your eyes, you'd look at the tracks and trails, but you had to use all the senses. You had to use your hearing. If there was warning calls from birds, warning calls from antelope, that was a sign there was a predator very nearby. If there was your sense of smell, if there was a smell of a carcass, you knew that there could be a kill nearby, hence there's a predator nearby. So all of your senses were alert at all times. And that kind of stayed with me forever. It's still with me, how to observe, where you literally, the first thing the guide told me was like, just stop where you are and be silent and listen, watch, use all the senses and go from there. So that really stood to me, and it's stayed with me forever, and it was very influential in my work now in the bog, even though there's no predators there. I'm not going to be killed, but the senses are all aware when I'm out there, and I think it's helped me with my photography.
Yeah, isn't it amazing when you hear that from you, Tina, and how heightened your senses are? And it sounds like some of us just sleepwalk through life, in the sense that we haven't that awareness, and as a result of not having that awareness, probably we don't see things that are there to be seen every day, but we miss them because we haven't that heightened senses. That sounds amazing to me. And it also sounds to me that Botswana obviously has left an indelible imprint on your soul as well.
Oh, absolutely, Sheila. They say that if you go to Africa for really any length of time, it gets into the bloodstream, and it is in my blood now, forever. I mean, I will be. I have visited since I came back. I came back in 2009. I have a son, and his dad is from Botswana, so we do visit. And he's been over here as well, and we go and visit there. So I do get my fix. I do get to go back there and appreciate it again. But my heart is here now. I've made peace with being back here in Ireland now, and especially to discover a wilderness here that I've fallen in love with completely. So,
excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if we just stay with Botswana for a few minutes, I'd love to know about, the photography. And obviously, they say a picture paints 1,000 words. And I have looked at some of your photography, and I had my grandson looking at it the other night, and he was fascinated with it. He really was. And I think, they say the children are the true connoisseurs. They know the value of everything and the price of nothing, right? But he really, really, he couldn't get over it. And I think when you have a 4-year-old child feeling that way about it, it must be absolutely fantastic. So if you just maybe describe some of the really fantastic moments where you feel that you got a treasure, and obviously the feedback from other people afterwards would have suggested the same.
Oh, there's so many instances in Botswana where literally the hair stands up on the back of your neck if you are in a vehicle. Like, it's an open vehicle. On safari there, you're not in a closed vehicle. You're in an open safari car where there's no windows. So when you're driving in the bush there, the wildlife is all around you, you know. There's nothing. There is nothing that compares with if you're in a vehicle and a lion roars behind you or beside the car. The whole car vibrates. It's so loud. It makes the hair just stand up in the back of your neck. It's just the most adrenaline rush. It's just the most incredible feeling to be among these amazing species. There's a huge population of elephants there. These gentle giants. I mean, I remember camping one night in a tiny little tent when I was on safari as part of the staff. I mean, the guests were in massive, big kind of meru tents. We were in small little tents. And I remember an elephant walking over my tent because I had a skylight in my tent, and the elephant walked over my tent, and I could see his through the windows. I could see his legs just trying to avoid the little guide ropes that hold the tent down, and its stomach rumbled as it walked over my tent. It was just mind-blowing. I also had an experience where I had lions mating outside my tent, where the female was they were mating, and after mating, the female lashes back at the male. So that happened right outside my tent as well. So I have so many experiences, but photography wise, to capture these things, to capture like herds of elephant walking through your space, lions just sleeping at your feet. It's very hard to describe. It's just an amazing feeling.
Yeah, and I'm thinking as you're speaking, it's certainly not for the faint-hearted.
Not for the faint-hearted, but it's different when you're there, though. When you're in that environment, you just adapt. I suppose it is not for the faint-hearted, but the guests that we would meet there, they would spend their whole life saving for this particular trip, and they would leave different people. You know, they'd arrive all excited, but they would leave with a special something inside, because really to experience being in the wild like that is something special. And I mean, Botswana is the size of France. There's only 2.5 million people there. Most of them live on the kind of eastern side of the country. So like, it's a vast country with so many wild areas. Like you have the Central Kalahari, you have Moremi, you have the largest wetland there, largest inland delta in the world. It's a heritage site now. I just felt very privileged to be there, you know.
Excellent.
Especially living there for so long.
Yeah, and you were.
Yeah, I really felt like 9 years is a long time. You know, it was my home. It really was my home then. In that time.
Yeah, and I think the world was very privileged that you went there, because you gave them such beautiful shots that we mightn't have been privileged to see if you hadn't gone there. So I think from that perspective, it was a two-way thing. And yeah, and congratulations on doing it. It's absolutely brilliant.
Oh,
And
thank you.
then if oh yeah, no, there's no doubt about it. You really have the gift, and I think they say it's an obligation, not a privilege, to use the gifts we've got. But having said that, I think in many cases they lie dormant, because sometimes it's fear. And as I said, if you hadn't been brave enough to follow the leads and to get yourself to Botswana, well, then obviously it would have been a missed opportunity in hindsight.
Hi folks, we really hope you enjoyed that episode. Tina's latest exhibition, Portals, is currently on display at the Riverside Art Centre in Newbridge, County Kildare. You can find out more about this and about her latest and upcoming books by following the link in the description. And also, please do consider supporting the Hut Near the Bog by either donating or purchasing products from our store. Links for both can be found in the description. See you next time. Bye.